Snoop Dogg and Master P.
Welcome to Boys in the Hood TV. Today we're going to be discussing the life of Lil C Style from the 19th Street Crips. Now Lil C Style was born Ronald Gilliam on July 7, 1974. Now he will be raised an only child and his family will stay in South Central on Normandy. Now by 1978, his father and mother would end up splitting up and he would be raised by his mother alone. But when his mother had to work, he would spend a lot of time with his grandmother who would take care of him. But also he would have a close relationship with his grandfather who would teach him how to gamble and also play dominoes. Now as a kid, as he played outside, he would see a lot of the dope boys in the neighborhood riding around in lowriders. And one day he wanted to inspire to be just like them. Now it wouldn't be too long before he would start getting into trouble, hanging out on the block. Now for a while, he and his mother would stay in South Central. But by the time he turned 11, his mother would move them to the east side of Long Beach in 1985. Now she had saved up enough money to get them a house to live on 19th Street. Now this block was located directly in the 19th Street Crips hood. Now although not a big hood, the 19th Street Crips are one of the most notorious gangs in the city of Long Beach. Now his mother's hope was that this move would help his behavior, but sadly, his rebellious behavior will continue on while he was in the 6th grade. And this would lead to him getting in trouble while at school, getting into fights, and smoking weed. Now staying on 19th Street, he would soon find himself running with a lot of the little homies who was already put on to the 19th Street Crips. And soon enough, Ronald would start carrying a gun for protection. And this would lead to him being detained one day for carrying a firearm. Now soon enough, this rebellious behavior would become too much for his mother to handle. And so she would decide it was time for him to go live with his father. Now from here, things will only get worse. And just like his mother, his father will grow tired of his behavior. He would end up sending Ronald right back to his mother's house on 19th Street. Now once back, he would eventually meet up with the big homie named Big C Style. Now this connection will result in Ronald getting his nickname known as Lil C Style. And around this time, his official put on will be solidified and he will be fully active gangbanging. Now running around Long Beach, he would develop relationships with a lot of homies from the Rolling 20s, like Big Flossie, and another teen who was 3 years older than him at the time, known as Calvis Broadus, aka Big Snoop Dogg. Now he and Snoop would become real close and kick it from time to time. Now although he was wilding out in the streets, he still attended school and he would complete his freshman year. But by the 10th grade, he would lose all interest in school altogether. So mid-semester, he would decide to drop out and he would become a full-time dope boy and hanging out on the west side, slanging coke. Now Lil C Style would be out on that block daily and he would start making some real money and eventually upgrade his clothing and even get him a car. And with this influx of cash, he and his homies would often take trips to Vegas to gamble. Now around the early 90s, his homie Snoop would end up linking up with Dr. Dre and being featured on multiple records. Now this would put a big spotlight on Long Beach, and Snoop Dogg would come back to the LBC and grab a lot of his homies like Warren G and Nate Dogg. Now Lil C Style will be in and out of jail on constant minor charges. But in around 1993, Snoop Dogg at the time was working on the soundtrack for a short film called Murder Was the Case, and he would end up reaching out to Lil C Style about coming into the studio and recording a verse. Now although Lil C Style wasn't a rapper, he saw it as an opportunity to make some money. Now at the time, Lil C Style had been going back and forth to St. Louis, linking up with the Crips out there, hustling and grinding. Now once he got this call from Snoop, he would take his time and start penning together some lyrics, so when he touched back down in Cali, he can go straight to the studio. Now once he got back to Cali, he would link up with his homie named Swoop G from the 20s, and they would both lay down verses on a song with Snoop called Who Got Some Gangster Shit for the soundtrack of Murder Was the Case.
From at least about 5 years ago, when I was in junior high, going to Marshall.
Now this record will make Lil C Style and Swoop G both local celebrities in the hood. Now one day, Snoop and Lil C Style was riding through Long Beach, and C Style would see his homie, Badass, who stayed around the corner from Big C Style in the hood. Now Badass, who was standing at the bus stop, would run up to the car and let Snoop know that he also rapped. So Snoop would ask Badass to kick a freestyle for him, and Badass would do so. Now after this introduction, Snoop was super impressed with him, so later he would reach out to Lil C Style to grab Badass and bring him down to the studio. Now everything would be going well for Lil C Style at the time, but that same year, Lil C Style would be arrested on gun charges. Now he had spent a little time in county, but eventually these gun charges will be dismissed and he'll be back on the streets. Now by 1995, Snoop would form the LBC Crew, and they will record a record known as Beware My Crew for the soundtrack of Thin Line movie starring Martin Lawrence. Now this song would also feature Big Trade from his Now this song would debut on the Billboard's Hot Rap Songs at number 8, giving Lil C Style even much more exposure to the world outside of Long Beach. Now Lil C Style, along with his homies, they would record and lay down tracks for their debut album for the LBC Crew, which they would eventually finish. But soon issues would start to arise, with Suge Knight wanting to get exclusive rights over the album. But also issues would arise about money between Snoop and Swoop G, but also there'd be issues between Snoop and Lil C Style when it came to money. Now in the midst of all his drama and success, Lil C Style will go back to doing what he did best, and that was hustling on the streets to provide for his family. Now eventually the LBC Crew album will be shelved, and Snoop Dogg will go on to release his sophomore album known as The Dogfather by 1996. But by 1997, the Death Row label was already falling apart, so Lil C Style would end up linking up with his homie Big C Style and signing to his record company, and he would continue to make music. But it wouldn't be too long before him and Snoop Dogg would patch everything back up, and they would go on to record a song called Death Row is Bitches.
Damn, I thought Suge was a gangster. You can't survive trying to dick a nigga, and that's real.
Now by 1999, Lil C Style was still out hustling in the streets, and he would be arrested on possession of marijuana, but he would immediately be able to post bail. Now around this same time, Snoop Dogg had signed to No Limit, and there will be a lot of animosity between Swoop G and Snoop Dogg. And Swoop G at the time was signed to Death Row, and he would hit up Lil C Style to come through and work on some new music for the Chronic 2000 compilation album, which they was putting together. But before things would get into motion, Lil C Style and Swoop G will have a dispute after Swoop G felt that Lil C Style went behind his back and dealt directly with Reggie, who was running Death Row at the time. So one evening, as Lil C Style was at a record shop on Artesia Boulevard, Swoop G would pull up, hop out, and just fire off on Lil C Style. Now both of them would start squabbling right in front of the record store. Now later that evening, Lil C Style would see Swoop G on 19th Street, and both of them would hug it out and squash that little beef that they had. Now eventually that year, the Chronic 2000 album will be released, and Lil C Style would have a verse on a song called Easy Being a Soldier, which features Swoop G, where he would diss both Snoop Dogg and Master P.
How you do that dirt with your long hair, bang out dirt, but in the hood you're straight scared.
Now by the fall of 1999, Lil C Style marijuana possession charges would be dismissed. And at this point, Lil C Style will start to tour with Death Row, who was under new management of Reggie Wright. Now although he was able to generate income from features and being signed to Death Row, Lil C Style would start losing interest in music. So this would lead to him missing studio sessions and showing up late to active studio sessions where he was supposed to be at. Now eventually, Lil C Style would decide to leave Death Row, and he would start up his own label called Rockhead Records with his homie. And in 2003, he would start working on his debut album called Blackballed. And this album would feature production by Daz and Superfly. Now after recording this album, by January 2004, he would release it. Now the album wouldn't break any numbers, and this would eventually be his first and very last album on his label, because eventually it will be dissolved. Now in 2005, Lil C Style will be arrested on drug charges, including possession of cocaine and transport to sale of narcotics. Now he would end up taking a plea deal, and he will be sentenced to 3 years probation. Now over the next several years, Lil C Style had to do what he had to do to survive, and he will be arrested on different minor offenses and spend some time in county jail here and there. But in 2012, things will go from bad to worse for Lil C. On September 28th, 2012, Lil C Style will be contacted by a female named Jacqueline who stayed in the hood on Lime Ave. Now she would tell him that her ex-boyfriend named John was drunk and he was tripping. Now Lil C Style and this dude named John, only weeks prior, had exchanged words after John had asked Lil C Style to turn down the music. So after having this conversation with Jacqueline on the phone, Lil C Style and his homie would pull up to Lime Ave. Now standing outside was a group of people, and you can see Jacqueline arguing with John at the house. Now Lil C Style will get out the passenger side of the car and head towards her apartment, but he will go to the back. Now as the man named John continued to argue with Jacqueline, suddenly a gunshot could be heard. And only seconds later, 6 more shots can be heard. And that man named John would be hit multiple times, once in the elbow, right leg, left leg, 3 times in the stomach, and 1 shot to the back of the head. Now, neighbors who were nearby would call 911, and police and EMTs would arrive on scene to find John bleeding on the ground. Now, he would be transported to the hospital and be rushed into surgery, where he would survive his injuries. Now, while John was still recovering in the hospital, police would show up and show a lineup of photos of members from 19th Street Crips, which included Big C Style and Tiny C Style. Now, John thought he recognized Tiny C Style, but he wasn't sure if he was the actual shooter. Now, police will continue to interview other multiple witnesses who were at the scene. Now, a man named Tony, who stayed in a nearby house, would tell police that he saw Lil C Style creeping alongside the apartments just before shots were fired. Now, as the police will continue to further investigate, they would start to look into Lil C Style, but also into Big C Style and Tiny C Style as possible suspects, because all 3 were members of 19th Street. Now, days later, while still recovering, John's girlfriend would call the detectives, who would show back up to the hospital, and John would show the police a photo of Lil C Style album cover, identifying him as the man who shot him. Now, detectives would eventually arrest Lil C Style and charge him with attempted murder. Now, by 2013, the trial would take place. Now, multiple witnesses, including the victim John, would take the stand. Now, John would testify that weeks prior to the shooting, he asked Lil C Style to turn down the music, and this would lead to a conflict between him and his ex Jacqueline. And he would admit only 2 weeks later that the night of the shooting, he was drunk and he would start an argument with Jacqueline over her not speaking to him. And he would state that not long after, Lil C Style would pull up, and the last thing that he remembers was hearing shots and seeing muzzle flashes. Now, he would claim that he never identified Lil C Style as the shooter to the police while he was at the hospital. But he would admit that he had suspected Lil C Style was the man who did shoot him. Now, also to testify was John D's girlfriend named Karen. Now, she would testify that she knew Lil C Style because she grew up with him in the neighborhood. And she would go on to tell the jury that a woman named Peaches had visited John while he was in the hospital, and after she left, John seemed visibly scared, as if his life had been threatened. Now, Jacqueline, who was at the scene during the shooting, would take the stand, and she would state that she had never called Lil C Style to come over, nor did she tell him to do anything to John. But she would claim that Lil C Style only came over to pick up some of his clothes. Now, she would state that she saw C Style pull up, but at the time that he pulled up, John had went back into his house. And so she later went inside her house and went to the bathroom. And while in the bathroom, she claimed that she heard gunshots, and when she came back outside, she saw John laying on the ground bleeding. Now, also the detectives who had interviewed John and other witnesses would take the stand that right before shooting the victim, Lil C Style could be heard saying, "Niggas gonna be tired of fucking with me, cuz." Now, shockingly, the defense will have Lil C Style take the stand, and he would admit that he was there at the scene at the time of the shooting, but he was not the shooter. He would claim that he saw a skinny black man holding a handgun, and that same man shot John. But ultimately, the jury didn't believe him. And by the end of the trial, Lil C Style will be found guilty of attempted murder, firearm, and great bodily injury enhancements. And Lil C Style will be sentenced to life in prison. I would like to thank everybody for tapping in, and I'll see y'all next time.